Presumed soon-to-be New Orleans Saints head coach Kellen Moore wants to lean on the superpowers of his players. So let's break down what superpowers the Saints have and what they could still add this offseason. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as the Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst with WWL TV. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, New Orleans Saints defensive end Cameron Jordan did not win the Walter Payton Man of the Year, but he will be awarded with the Locked On Saints Man of the Year. I'll tell you why. We'll take a look at the New Orleans Saints defensive coaching staff turnover as it continues and what to expect when the coaching staff begins to fill out. We're going to lead everything off today with my most recent chat with Kellen Moore as he met with some of New Orleans and Philly media, Super Bowl media, if you will. And we spoke a little bit about the superpowers he wants to lean in on when it comes to his offenses. We got all that and much more for you on today's show. So whether it's your first time or your next time, thank you very much for making us your first listen and for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by friends over at FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet $5. And if you win that $5 bet for the first bet, you'll get $200 in bonus bets as well. Just visit FanDuel.com today to get started. We got an opportunity to speak with Kellen Moore again as I continued to pester and I'm sure annoy him as he sat at his table at Super Bowl Radio Row over at the team hotel, kind of getting the lay of the land and getting in some questions around the Super Bowl. And of course, some potential learning, opportunities about Kellen himself and maybe filling out his staff and things like that. And one of the things that stood out to me from one of the questions that I asked, where I was kind of going down this tangent of the importance of the tight end in his offense, which we're going to break down in tomorrow's episode. But to follow it up, because he kind of spoke about Dallas Goedert as like an all-around tight end. And so to follow it up, I said, well, how do you maximize the guys that aren't necessarily all-around tight ends, but have one specific thing where they thrive, one specific area of the game wherein they thrive? And I loved Kellen Moore's answer. He said simply that every player has a superpower and that you want to identify what those superpowers are and lean in to those. And so I love the way that he thought about that, right? Every player has something worth investing in, kind of leaning on, maximizing the opportunities of all of that. And so it was great to hear that from Kellen Moore because as we've discussed a bunch here on the show, that hasn't necessarily been what's gone on over the course of the past few years. You'll remember Sean Payton back in the day would often talk about a couple of things in particular. He would often talk about how much he doesn't care when you were drafted, if you were traded for, if you were signed by as a free agent. Everyone kind of started on the same playing field right away for Sean Payton. And then based upon who did things well and what it is that they did well, that's how he would build his offense. And it sounds like Kellen Moore takes a similar approach. We broke down in yesterday's quick episode or shorter episode around like what Kellen Moore's offensive system is. And really it's kind of an amalgamation or a blend of a bunch of different offenses that he's already done that often are influenced as well by what players already do well on the offense in terms of their personnel and what the defense across him does. He'll adjust his offense week to week based upon what it is that the defense struggles in, what to attack, mismatches, right? All those other things. And also what they're strongest at and what to avoid. But I loved the superhero comment a lot. And so I went through and I picked a few players, kind of the biggest names on offense as we expect going into 2025. I left out some people that aren't technically on contract, and I stuck to guys that are on contract and play skilled positions and stuff like that. And I wrote down what I think their superpowers are and how you can end up utilizing them. So let's start off with one player that should be kind of the most important. Now, we got to see how the offseason impacts his position room. Because in free agency as well as in the draft, his position room could be completely changed. But running back Alvin Kamara. Alvin Kamara had a fantastic season last year, 950 rushing yards, almost broke 1,000 rushing yards for his first season, but of course added a ton of receiving yards and other ways that he's contributed as a leader, eventually being promoted to team captain, all those other things. When I look at his superpowers, The two things that I wrote down were contact balance and ability in space. So how do you maximize that? You get him out in space. You do that with the outside zone run, and then you do that by also getting him the ball in the passing game. But you also have to make sure you're complementing that in order to make sure that getting him out in space, particularly in the wide run or the outside run, outside zone, wide zone, stuff like that, is most effective. And one of the ways to do that is to try to condense a defensive formula or a defensive formation, excuse me. And the formula for doing that is to also challenge between the tackles, not necessarily give that defense an opportunity to know what it is that you're going to do. Saints didn't do a good job of that last year. Let's go to Chris Olave. Chris Olave, for me, the two superpowers that he has are release mechanics at the line of scrimmage, as well as separation. So for me, when it comes to separation, give this guy more crossing routes. Let him cross the middle of the field. Let him use that speed. Let him put these corners in chase and trail positions where they have to operate behind him and are struggling the focus to get on that inside hip and everything. I think that that's got to be a great way to elevate a little bit more of Olave's superpowers. The other one is to move him around the formation. Fantastic release mechanics means that he can work off of off coverage as well as press coverage, put him in situations where the defense has to try to challenge him with both and let him overcome that challenge. How about the wide receiver across from him, Rashid Shaheed? For me, his two superpowers are speed, undoubtedly, as well as versatility. And we've seen versatility a little bit, but I'd like to see the New Orleans Saints lean a little bit more in that. And I'd be curious if Kellen Moore is indeed going to take the job as the New Orleans Saints head coach, what he would do with a guy like Rashid Shaheed, knowing that he can do a little bit more than just catch passes. So, of course, you let him play deep. You let him challenge deep. You let him use that speed in that area of the field. Absolutely no doubt about that. And then the second thing I would say is to get him more involved in the run game. Jet sweeps, operate him out of the line of scrimmage. Out of the backfield. Let him run some routes out of the backfield, things like that. I'd be really interested to see if Rashid Shaheed's game takes another step forward. A, once he's healthy, but then also B, if he's utilized in a bunch of different ways. Quarterback Derek Carr, presuming that he could be the quarterback in 2025. I didn't want to leave him out of this. My two things there are the deep ball as well as pre-snap diagnosis. Derek Carr is still a really good quarterback before the snap. It's one of the reasons why he hasn't been super responsible for a ton of turnovers since he's been here in New Orleans, not from the interception category at least. And so give him a menu when he goes up to the line of scrimmage, allow him to be able to make adjustments based on what he's seeing pre-snap. And then the deep ball, great for Rashid Shaheed, great for Chris Olave, allow them to play deep and take the top off of defense. Let's say the New Orleans Saints don't go with Derek Carr in 2025, but want to go with the young option in Spencer Rattler, who is on the roster. His two for me, throwing on the run, as well as mobility. I think that those are his two strengths. I think confidence is definitely up there as well, like ability to lead the huddle. I think that's definitely there. But for me, mobility, throwing on the run, those are the two big things. And so moving the pocket, which the Saints did a lot of during his games and during his snaps. I think that was a good move last year by Clint Kubiak. I'd like to see Kellen Moore or whoever the New Orleans Saints whoever the New Orleans Saints head coach is, end up taking a little bit of that and also, of course, building upon it. And then also encourage some playground play. I think teams would benefit quite a bit from practicing this a bit more. What happens when a play breaks down? What can your quarterback do? The Kansas City Chiefs really work on all these different situations in a way that it feels like no other team in the league does. I'd embrace a little bit of that if you're rolling with Spencer Rattler. And then finally, I did want to get one tight end here. Technically, Juwan Johnson's not under contract, so I won't mention him, but Foster Moreau. All-around tight end for me. He's a guy that can catch. He's not a guy that's like a run-after-catch guy to a maximum extent. He's not a big breakaway game breaker type, but he can block. He can block in line. He can block in the passing game, protecting the passing game, and block in the run game. So I think for me, it's just about not limiting Foster Moreau. And then it's about finding him that complementary piece for if he's going to be the all-around guy, go and get the guy that can be that threat over the middle. So I think that those are some of, not all of, but those are some of the superpowers that the New Orleans Saints offense has. Coming up next, before we dive into the defensive turnover continuing on the New Orleans Saints coaching staff, let's dive into the superpowers that the New Orleans Saints don't have, including big bodies, athletic bodies, and dynamic quarterback play. I want to get to all that next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. What are some of your relationship green flags? Not the red flags, but the green flags. You hear all the time about red flags that you should avoid. But what about identifying things and the positive signs in our relationships, the positive stuff, the green flags? Well, if you're not sure how to look at that, therapy can be a good way to get there, and not only get there, but also actively practice your searching and finding of green flags and supporting of green flags, and even embody that green flag energy yourself. You can do all of that by checking out BetterHelp today, which can help you out big time. I've told you a ton of times already that like I love therapy. It's made a lot of big changes for me, for my personal life, but as well as the relationships around me and helping to identify those green flags. So discover your relationship green flags with BetterHelp today. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon. You'll get 10% off of your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. All right, family. The New Orleans Saints offense has some superpowers, but there's still a few superpowers that I think the New Orleans Saints don't have at this moment and could potentially look to grab over the course of the off season. Let's start off with a couple that we've talked about a bunch before. Contested catches, I think, is such a big one, right? The 50-50 balls, things like that. Yards after catch. So we're going to start off here with the pass catchers. The contested catch side of this for me isn't necessarily, because I think Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed actually make more contested catches than I think people give them credit for. But you don't have that 6'3", 6'2", 220 pound, 215 pound wide receiver that can just push a guy out of the way, catch a pass and everything like that, and kind of make some of those tougher downs, easier downs, get you ahead of the sticks, all that other stuff. And so finding a player like that, like a Teteroa McMillan, who we've talked about a ton out of Arizona in the first round of this year's draft, or if you want to wait till a little bit later, Jaden Higgins is one of my favorites out of Iowa State. There's a lot of these guys. Nick Nash out of San Jose State, much later in the draft as well. So you don't have to rush to find this. And you might even be able to find this skill set in free agency as well, right? T. Higgins is going to be the number one guy on the market. I don't think the Saints are going to be able to land him, but that prototype, that archetype rather, a player, definitely something that would be very beneficial to New Orleans. Yards after catch, I think it's another big one. Back in the day when Drew Brees was the most successful, but towards the end of his career to where he wasn't necessarily airing it out, but that Saints offense got a little bit more condensed and closer to the line of scrimmage. The thing that they did really well in that was yards after catch, deliver and go and create. And so I think finding ways to be able to implement that more in the offense, get the players that have that skill, find ways to get that out of Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed and be able to maximize that. I think that's another great way for the Saints to find their way to adding that superpower of yards after catch. Let's keep the yards conversation going. And how about we go back to the backfield here? One of the other big ones is yards after contact. Now, the Saints did better at that last year, but would I consider it a superpower? No, not just yet. But the Saints have every opportunity to be able to add that. How you utilize your running backs in your run game, how you utilize them in your passing game as an extension of the run game, all of that ends up potentially seeing a big boost for guys like Alvin Kamara, Kendre Miller, and others who might be back next season. I think that that's another way that the Saints could go, and another superpower that this team could look to add to its list of, superpowers. And look, in the draft, obviously, there's going to be like 30 graded. I think it was Jordan Reed over at ESPN said like 30. He had 30 running backs that were draft eligible grades, that had draft eligible grades. So you're definitely going to be able to find that position. You can jump in the first round if you want and get the most dynamic player in this year's draft, potentially an Ashton Jeanty, the running back out of Boise State. And so you could go that route, or you could wait a little bit. Dylan Sampson out of Tennessee has a lot of that. Quinshon Judkins out of Ohio State has a lot of that. Cam Scadaboo out of Arizona State has a lot of that. RJ Harvey out of UCF. You can go to what's the other guy that I really like? DJ Higgins, I think his name is. There's a bunch of these guys that are in this year's draft where you would be able to find that. So I think that would be a big one that the New Orleans Saints could potentially kind of lean in on and invest in. And even a guy like Devin Neal out of Kansas, who is a little bit more of the big body kind of bowling ball type, yards after contact. That's exactly what you want. Dynamic quarterback play. And some people are going to disagree with me on this one, and that's okay. That's fine. I'd love to hear like what other superpowers the Saints team can add, what other superpowers they have that I didn't mention, especially since I was super selective over like the 6 players that I talked about and stuff like that, mostly for time. But dynamic quarterback play is a little bit different to me, and I think it can look different as well. I don't think that dynamic quarterback play necessarily has to be what you have with um, a Lamar Jackson or a rookie of the year, right? Offensive rookie of the year, Jaden Daniels. It doesn't necessarily have to be that kind of dynamic in that you can run and throw the football, but even just being able to attack all three levels of the field, being able to do so consistently, being able to hit the boundary areas as well as be able to work the middle of the field, all those other things, in breaking, out breaking routes, dynamic quarterback play just through the pass, or if you're able to find somebody like we highlighted the mobility of a Spencer Rattler. If you're able to find somebody or Spencer Rattler develops a little bit further in all of that, then I think that all of that ends up kind of creating dynamic quarterback play. So I could look a little bit different. Doesn't necessarily have to come from outside of the facility. Could easily come from inside the facility. But we'll see where things go when it comes to all of it. But I do think dynamic quarterback play is something that New Orleans could benefit from. That might not be a 2025 ad. That might be more like a 2026 ad. But ideally, if you're hiring Kellen Moore, and if he does indeed become the Saints' next head coach, the Saints are giving him time. Here's a long contract. Here's the patience to make sure that you're able to really flip this roster, understanding their salary cap situation, understanding that their roster needs to get younger or will get younger, and there's going to be roster turnover and all those other things. I think that that is going to be a big piece of it. The last thing that I want to mention in terms of superpowers for me is a scheme-changing talent. What do I mean when I talk about a scheme-changing talent? Prime Jimmy Graham forced you to change the way that you approach the game as an opposing defense because you had to be ready for Jimmy Graham. You couldn't just do what it is that you did. You had to do what it is that you did while also getting ready for the massive mismatch that Jimmy Graham created. Jimmy Graham was a scheme-changing talent. Drew Brees was a scheme-changing talent. Those guys were threats. Marcus Colson was a threat. Lance Moore was a threat. Pierre Thomas, Deuce McAllister, Reggie Bush, these guys were all threats. Alvin Kamara, Rashid, Shaheed, Chris Olave, threats. That's kind of where the list ends. And even those threats have their limitations. And so can you find the guy that ends up making it to where you actually put fear in the defense as you line up across them, the way that Drew Brees did when you got the ball back to him with more than a minute left on the clock, or really with any time left on the clock? Can you recapture something like that? It doesn't have to be the exact same thing, right? You're not trying to replicate. You're trying to replicate the success that you found with Drew Brees and Sean Payton, but you're not going to be able to literally replicate the tenure of Drew Brees and Sean Payton from an approach standpoint, from a coaching standpoint, from an attitude standpoint, all those other things. But can you find somebody that strikes fear into the hearts of opposing defenses? I think that's something that you're still looking for on this team. So that could be a Tedero McMillan, that could be an Ashton Jeanty, that could be some other player that you invest in at some point in the draft or in free agency that ends up coming in. Insert your favorite name here. As long as the Saints find someone like that over the course of the next couple of years, or ideally multiple players like that over the next couple of years, and the best case scenario would be to find one at quarterback, that could be a huge deal. So those are the other things: contested catches, yards after the catch, yards after contact in the run game, dynamic quarterback play, and scheme-changing talent. Those are just 5. There's more. But let me know what other superpowers you think the New Orleans Saints should look to add over the course of the offseason. Not necessarily players, but if you want to tell me players too, that's fine. But what are the superpowers that they could add? And what are the superpowers that they have that I didn't list in my very selective list of 6 people? Real quick, I want to let you know, defensive turnover on the coaching staff is expected to continue. It sounds like Joe Woods as well as Marcus Robertson are being considered on Pete Carroll's staff over with the Las Vegas Raiders. It'd be a little bit of a homecoming for those guys. Joe Woods and Marcus Robertson have coached, of course, in the AFC West. Marcus Robertson has been with the Raiders before, and I believe Joe Woods has been with the Raiders before as well. So kind of an interesting opportunity for like a little bit of a homecoming, if you will. So we'll see exactly what happens there. But this just furthers what it is that we expect, that you're going to see this entire coaching staff really flip here over the course of next year. And then you might see some more changes and tinkering on that coaching staff, depending upon who becomes available next year or the year after as well. So don't expect what you see on the coaching staff in 2025 to be a finished product come 2026 and 2027 either. So a couple names to watch out for: Joe Woods, New Orleans Saints defensive coordinator, and then defensive backs coach Marcus Robertson, potentially, or certainly at this point, it sounds like in conversation or in consideration. That's what I was looking for with the Raiders. We'll see if they end up actually heading that way. Coming up next, Cam Jordan might not have won Walter Payton Man of the Year at NFL Honors, but he's winning Locked On Saints Man of the Year. Let me tell you why. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, two teams, but endless possibilities, especially when it comes to Super Bowl betting. I love Super Bowl betting. I call it betting Christmas because there's just so much fun stuff to get in on right now. They've got fun props like Lane Johnson, the offensive lineman for the Philadelphia Eagles, plus 10,000 if he catches a touchdown. Put $1 down, win 100. Put $10 down, win, what is it, 1,000 at that point? Like, it's awesome. So you can go and check that one out. You could also get into the Triple Crown, leader in passing yards, rushing yards, and receiving yards. You can go Patrick Mahomes, Saquon Barkley, and Devontae Smith from over with the Eagles. That would get you plus 1,200 odds. Really, really good stuff there. So you can go check them out today. You can download the app or head over to FanDuel.com to get started. New customers can bet $5. And if you win with that as your first bet, you'll score $200 in bonus bets right away. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. Today's episode of Locked On Saints presented by our friends over at Prize Picks. I love Prize Picks. Daily fantasy made easy. No more bad trade proposals. No navigating injuries and stuff like that. It's you and your football knowledge versus the house, and allows you to turn your football opinions into cold, hard cash. Here's how it works. All you got to do is pick more or less on at least two players' stat projections. And if you're right, you can end up taking home up to 1,000 times your cash. And Prize Picks right now even has a free pick for the big game. Patrick Mahomes only has to throw for 1 yard and you'll get a free square. Pair that with one more win and you are cashing out. So go and check them out today. You can download the Prize Picks app and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL, Locked On NFL, for $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. New Orleans Saints defensive end Cam Jordan might not have won Walter Payton Man of the Year, as that went to Arik Armstead. But I'm going to give him Locked On Saints Man of the Year. Look, I understand that Cam Jordan and conversation around him sometimes can be a little conflicting, right? People are oftentimes talking about how he's on a decline. His production hasn't been what his production was at earlier points in his career and all that. I get all that. I understand. I'm sure he understands those conversations as well. But looking at Cam Jordan as more than just a producer or non-producer on the field, which, by the way, when his snaps ticked up last year after the Saints effectively demoted defensive line coach, Todd Grantham, you saw him become a little bit more effective. You saw him getting in the backfield, getting sacks, all those other things. And so Cam still has something left. He intends to play again next year. He intends to play for the Saints next year. It's all about now how the Saints feel about continuing to have him on the roster, right? That's a decision that they'll have to make. But you've got him ready to play. You've got Demario Davis saying he wants to play 3 more years as well. And all that. And I think you're going to hear something about that from another player on defense here very soon. And so I think that those conversations around Cam Jordan as an aging product have kind of lessened what it is that he does and what he means beyond the field. And so I just want to do a little reminder here, not necessarily because I feel like anybody has forgotten or anything like that, but mostly because I think that there are situations here to where like you lose something or you don't get something like Walter Payton Man of the Year. And because of that, it can feel like the doldrums for you a little bit. But I want to recognize a little bit more of what it is that Cam Jordan has done. So this just a reminder, this is a guy that spends every Tuesday, which by the way is the NFL off day. So instead of not being at practice and being at home or rehabbing or whatever, Cam's at high schools in the local community, speaking with them about their future and how to invest in their future, how to better themselves, enrichment, all these other things. Oftentimes, he's also bringing gifts and all this other stuff that he ends up bringing to all of these deals. He's got his own foundation as well, the Cam Jordan Foundation, where he does incredible work. He's worked with a ton of different organizations around, including Crescent City Core, working on like anti-bias training and stuff like that. He has done things like Inspire Change, was a docu-series that was about policing in New Orleans. He's done some things that are like relevant to social justice, like actually changing people's lives. And he does a turkey giveaway every year, all these other things. And that is the core of kind of who Cam Jordan is, how he can give. When he's on the field, he gives his effort. When he's in his locker room, he gives leadership. When he is with his coaches, he gives, I assume, some additional feedback and additional help. When he is on when he is at high schools, he gives inspiration. When he is at these annual turkey drives, he is giving people sustenance. Like, this is who Cam Jordan is. Cam Jordan just kind of gives. And so I wanted to recognize Cam Jordan a little bit. Cam, I know it's not the same as a Walter Payton Man of the Year, but hope you know that like there is a difference or there are eyes on the differences that are being made by a guy like Cam Jordan. And so I just wanted to celebrate Cam. I was hoping to be able to come on here and kind of highlight him as the Walter Payton Man of the Year and all this other stuff. And how incredible would it have been, right? Like, just looking at the would have been here. Super Bowl's in New Orleans. NFL Honors is in New Orleans. Steve Gleason and Drew Brees were giving the award. We're presenting the award. And how cool would it have been to see the hometown player, hometown as in his hometown as a player, right? He's been a New Orleans Saint his entire career. How cool would it have been to see Cam Jordan be honored by Drew Brees and Steve Gleason, two massive staples and importantly massive figures in New Orleans Saints history, and to have all of that done here in the city of New Orleans would have been really, really cool. And unfortunately, we didn't get that moment, but maybe, just maybe, Cam Jordan is one of 32 nominees again next year, and he gets the opportunity to be able to see himself walk up there and accept the award in San Francisco as the 2026 Man of the Year, the Walter Payton Man of the Year. But for right now, I hope that Locked On Saints Man of the Year award will do. He was also the recipient of the 2025 Bart Starr Award too, which is another highly prestigious honor. But I know he wanted that Walter Payton Man of the Year award. Who wouldn't, especially if you're nominated as one of 32. And so just being nominated as one of 32 as a whole, like, still allows you to be able to get a donation done in, to your favorite charity. And all, it's still an honor to be nominated, I'm certain. But hopefully Cam is able to go up there and accept that award next year over as the Super Bowl dives in at the Bay Area or in the Bay Area. So I just wanted to highlight that for a little while. Locked On Saints Man of the Year, definitely Cam. Jahri Evans did not get into the Hall of Fame at NFL Honors. That stinks because you were kind of hoping that he would get there this year. Eric Allen, former New Orleans Saints wide receiver, former Philadelphia Eagles wide receiver as well. I should show that respect considering the Eagles are playing in the Super Bowl this weekend. But former New Orleans Saints wide receiver Eric Allen did, however, get into the Hall of Fame. Next year, Drew Brees is eligible to get into the Hall of Fame. Drew Brees should be a first ballot Hall of Famer. There is no doubt in my mind about that. And I kind of think it'd be pretty cool if Drew and Jahri both got in the same year, if that's possible. I think Jahri's still eligible again next season. And if so, that'd be pretty cool. Like, it'd be awesome to see both of those guys get in to the Hall of Fame at the same time. Drew is going to be first ballot. He absolutely deserves to be first ballot. If he's not first ballot, we got to figure out what's going on here. And everything, but it'd be super cool to see both Drew Brees and Jahri Evans end up being able to get their gold jackets together. And Jahri Evans is going to be a name to watch this offseason as well. Does he stick around as the offensive line coach? Does he continue to work with the New Orleans Saints as an offensive line assistant? Like, how do they end up working that out? He's going to be an interesting name to watch with the coaching staff stuff too. But as a former New Orleans Saint, spending most of his career as a New Orleans Saint and being one of the best offensive linemen and the best interior offensive lineman, in my opinion, in New Orleans Saints history, would be super cool to see him and his quarterback get into the Hall of Fame at the same time. So we'll be waiting for that for next year. Hopefully, we'll be hearing more about Jahri Evans still remaining in New Orleans here in the coming weeks. We appreciate you very much for being here with us. Coming up in tomorrow's episode, we'll do a Saturday episode. I owe you a bunch of stuff from Radio Row. It just takes editing time and all that kind of stuff. So I'll make sure I get all that stuff to you tomorrow. Some stuff from Kellen Moore, some stuff from my conversation with Blake Groupie. And honestly, it gives me an extra day to grab some stuff too. I'm hoping to get with Bub Means and a couple of other players. And so we'll see how things go on Friday on Radio Row. But expect that for Saturday. A little bit more of that on Sunday. And then hopefully we're talking New Orleans Saints coaching hire on Monday. We appreciate you very much, as always, making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. If you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing, them, how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.